Ramya. I'm the Citizen Science Coordinator for the Biscayne Community Foundation. As many of you know, we do a lecture once a month during the school year. So we'll have one, I think the last one is in April. Today we have with us Jesus Blanco. He has quite extensive knowledge of insects and crops, and he's going to talk to you guys about that today. If there are any key challenge kids here, make sure that you sign in the back so I know that you were here. And if anybody wants to be on our mailing list so that you're informed of future events and lectures, then I also have a mailing list in the back. Just give me your email address. And with that, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, so first of all, thank you all for showing up. I'm very happy to stand up here and give you a little information about the role that insects play in our food crops and the importance of these ecological relationships. Let me start off by saying I grew up on a farm. I had the opportunity to play around in the dirt a lot, play around the trees. My favorite thing to do was to go outside and capture any kind of creature that I could, put it in a little glass jar, and just take a magnifying glass to it and look at that river. But my mom would get me these insect identification guides and these encyclopedias that I would love to read them nonstop. So one of the challenges that I would give myself is I would try to go out and try to find each and every insect that was in that book, and if I didn't, I would try to identify it. And it became this passion, this thing that I've been doing ever since. It's gotten to the point that anytime any of my friends come across this creature or an animal that they don't know about, the first thing they do is they send me a text and say, hey, what's this? My education is in Enviromental Studies. I got my degree at FIU. I was lucky enough to have a really good professor that was leading research and restoration ecology and monitoring these environments in the Everglades being funded. These projects were funded through the U.S. Department of Corps of Engineers. And these are the most important projects in terms of restoration for our system. So as soon as I graduated, I had the opportunity to become the lab manager because I excelled in identifying plants, identifying animals, insects. And because of this background that I've had, I knew these interactions between these living organisms, plants, the insects, the creatures that they feed on, the creatures that feed others. And I would see how they would interact with the abiotic environment. That means what kind of soils do you have? What's the water conditions like? That was something that I had been doing for a long time and that I continue to enjoy doing. So a little bit of the history, I would go out to these remote locations on airboat. I was an airboat captain for my time there, and I was also the helicopter crew manager. So my responsibility was to lead the field research, to record data, bring it back to the lab, and to do analysis on it. And the reports that we would generate from this data that we collected is what the Corps of Engineers applies in the field. So, a lot of the times I would go out there in helicopters, near remote locations, but I became very sensitive to motion. So it got to the point where one day I said, I can't fly anymore. So I told the pilot, either you take me back or I'm having to jump off this helicopter because the motion sickness was so intense. So unfortunately, I left that job as a researcher, but now I'm the FIU Farmers Outreach Coordinator and Educator. So with my extensive background in farming, understanding ecological relationships, I am now able to help folks that are interested in starting farming in this business or producing food for themselves or family or any agri-related business. I help them establish it by acquiring loans through the USDA, help small farmers, but I also network them with local farmers who are doing something similar to what they're interested in. So if we have folks that are interested in becoming beekeepers, I know a few beekeepers that we can hook you up with. You get mentored, free of cost. We actually pay you to learn, and that's what I'm doing. So in that program, there was a young couple of beekeepers who they were interested in becoming farmers. And what happened was they saw this love of insects that I've had and my experience with insects and raising crickets and mealworms and all these kinds of things for my exotic pets which I love keeping arachnids and scorpions, all kinds of critters that people won't normally accept. So they invited me to become one of their beekeepers. And this spring I'm going to be heading their queen rearing project. So I'm going to be producing queens for folks that are interested in becoming beekeepers, but we're also producing queens to replace the hives that we rescue. So a lot of this work that we do with apiary is bee removals. And as you know, a lot of you might have heard of killer bees or Africanized bees. They're not really out there to kill you, they're out there to defend their hive. So one of the points that one of the characteristics of these hives is that they're very defensive. Right? Once you approach the hive, you pop the lid, they're all coming out to greet you at your face. And that's not something that you want as a beekeeper. So what I'm going to talk about is the importance of the relationship, this ecological relationship between insects and our food crops. These insects provide a pollination service. What that means is they will go out and visit every single flower that they can to collect pollen for themselves as a food source. And what they're doing as a side effect of that is they're actually taking the pollen from the male part of the flower, which is the anther, and they're going to deposit it at the next flower, in the stigma, which will produce seeds. It'll bear fruit. That plant will bear fruit. It will bear seeds as a reproductive function. So without pollinators, that function will have to be done either manually, or we will just have to live with the consequences of having poor yields. Those insects are the workhorse of the farming industry. They are the ones that do the hard work for you. So the more bees you have, the more pollination that's being done, the greater the economic value you're going to have, which translates to a greater food supply. Well, my focus is going to be on bees, particularly the honeybees. The bees, they have different social structures within the hive. You have the queen bee, which is that bee right in the middle, top right. She's the largest one, and her sole purpose is to lay eggs. This queen can produce up to 2,000 eggs per day at a rate of 5 to 6 eggs per minute. So they're very prolific. The thing about that is it takes about 12 bees to produce 1 teaspoon of honey in their lifetime. Okay? So to produce 1 pound of honey, you're expecting about 2 million flowers to be visited by these bees per hive. So a hive typically holds maybe 40 to 60 pounds worth of honey at the end of that nectar flow. So you can imagine the amount of work that these insects are out there doing. There's 3 types of bees in the hive. The worker bee at the top is the one that does all the duties. As soon as they emerge from the cells, they become what they're called nurse bees. Nurse bees are the youngest bees, and their sole purpose is to receive, or rather take nectar from the incoming bees, feed them to the larva, feed it to the queen, feed all the other bees within the colony, and they'll continue to do that until they're reach a little bit more mature levels. Once they graduate from being nurse bees, they become guard bees. So their purpose now is to just hang around the hive and just defend in case anything happens. Once they're a little bit older, they become the forager bees. These are the bees that you see out in your garden, visiting each flower, collecting nectar, collecting pollen. And what they're doing is they're bringing it back to the hive, storing it within the comb as a source of protein and as a source of emergency food stores in case there is ever a time where there's not enough nectar being produced. What the drone does is the male bee, and his sole purpose is to mate with other queens. So come swarm season, which is now in April and March, the bees kick into high gear into producing these male bees. What will happen is the bees will come out, fly out to a local spot, we don't know where, a few hundred feet up in the air, and what they'll do is they'll congregate, and queens will fly to these locations to mate and come back to the hive to lay their she only has to make once in her lifetime, and she'll just make millions of eggs. A queen can live 3 to 4 years before her productivity levels start. 3 to 4 years. Right? The average lifespan of a worker bee is about 20-something days. Yeah. So it's a constant production, it's a constant cycle, a turnover of bees.
And the male bee?
The male bee, once he mates, it's done. He's over. Yeah. And the thing about that is, if they don't mate and the winter comes, all the worker bees will kill all the drones. So what they're doing is they're making sure that they're going to have enough resources just to support the workers, the essential bees within the hive. Support the queen, support the workers. Like the drones are not doing their job, they're out.
How do they kill them?
They sting them. They sting each other. So the thing about stingers is, as a beekeeper, you get a lot of stings. Once you get stung by a bee, they have a barbed stinger, so that stinger remains stuck in your skin, and they try to fly away and it pulls out their organs, so they actually die when they sting you. But once they're stinging other insects, that barb does not get stuck in the other creatures, so they can repeatedly sting other insects and things like that. So that's something that happens within the hive. As you can see down here in this lower right picture, that's actually a removal that I did from underneath a shipping container. So living in an urban environment, the bees can find a lot of places to hide, to live. They find a place for security, typically within the eaves of your roof, within the walls of the shed, things like that. And by the time you notice a bee population just moving in and out, the chances are that they've been there for quite some time and you've never just even noticed. There's just a constant trickle of bees in and out. So the bees, they produce honey as a byproduct of this pollination. Right? So what they do is they drink the nectar, they bring it back to the hive, and they'll actually pass it off to the next bee. That bee will keep that honey stored in its honey stomach, is what they call it. They mix it with some enzymes, and then it'll pass it over to the next bee. And this cycle continues until eventually one bee says, I'm going to deposit it within the cells of this comb. Once it's been deposited, it's a very, the water concentration is very high. So what the bees will do is they'll stand outside the cells and they'll beat their wings. They'll fan their wings until the humidity level within that nectar drops to about 20%. That's when we know it has honey. So what they'll do then is they'll cover it with a light coat of wax, and they'll just keep going up. They just keep storing the honey until the rainy day where they can't go out, and they'll need that source to feed.
What is the wax?
So where does the wax come from? So to produce wax, the bees have these special glands that in order to produce wax, they need to consume honey. So in order to produce 1 pound of wax, the bees have to consume 8 pounds of honey. Right? So again, let's go back to it takes 12 bees to make 1 teaspoon of honey. These jars is just 1 pound of honey. Right? So imagine the amount of bees.
So how many bees to make one?
Quite a bit. Several hundred thousand. Anyone tell me where the queen is in that picture up front, at the top left?
So one of the middle, or a bit to the left?
Yeah, it has a red dot on her back.
Yes, yes.
You see it? So one of the exercises when inspecting a beehive for its health is to make sure that you spot the queen and that she's producing larvae, she's producing eggs. And what we do as beekeepers is we do just a little bit of paint on her back so that we can easily spot her within thousands of bees that you're trying to sort through.
Where is she? I don't see it.
See the red dot on her back?
Yeah.
She's a little bit larger than most bees.
Redder.
Right. So the color of the queen bee varies, as well as the coloration of the worker bees. Sometimes you'll have black bees, sometimes you'll have these golden caramel colored bees. But that's all dependent on the genetics of the bee once they go out on their mating flight. So one thing that I wanted to mention was, you can see here, these 3 jars of honey. I don't know if you can see the different colors in it. Those colors are, they're like that because they've been visiting different nectar sources. So all these bees were located within the same bee yard, but as you can see, the hives, they had a different preference for a taste of nectar that they wanted. So we have these very clear, very fluid honey, yellow almost. Let's pass these around.
I mean, just pivot.
And this one is from a removal that I did within the wall that those bees, the owner tells me he must have been there. The bees must have been there for about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So anything with flowers will attract bees. That's the wonderful thing because
Any bush or tree?
yes, there's one bush, one tree that I can recommend. It's called the Amelia patens, which is the fire bush. It's very common here in landscaping throughout the county. Fire bush. So that plant will not only attract bees, but it'll attract many different species of bees, many different species of butterflies as well. So it's important to remember that bees are not the only pollinator out there. We have moths, beetles, bats, anything that pretty much, butterflies as well. So by you planting trees to attract butterflies, you're also attracting bees as well. Pretty much, I'm going to show you, this is my daughter's hand. She's holding out a little bit of honey. And what she said, I wonder if the honeys will be attracted to me, right? So she grabs the honey from the jar, she puts a little glob on her hands, and she just waited outside until the first bee came out and tasted that honey. So what happens is that bee will come, taste that honey, it'll relay the information back to the hive, and eventually she had just dozens of bees flying around her waiting to drink from her hand. Very cool experiment. I don't recommend it if you've never been stung by a bee, because while they're feasting, while they're feeding, the bees are not in an aggressive, defensive mode. They're just concerned about collecting that nectar, collecting that honey, bringing it back home. There you go. Wow. See that? You see their little mouth parts. You can see their tongue just coming in and out of their mouth, laughing up all that. Right. So the incredible thing about these bees is that 75% of our fruits, vegetables, and nuts are all pollinated by either the European honeybee or any other bee living within the habitats. The special thing about Florida is that we have a very warm climate where we can support productivity in terms of fruit production, vegetable production, and even honeybee production all year round. So we're very famous for our oranges. We don't really grow oranges anywhere else in the country. It's too cold.
But why would the bees want to eat honey that was already produced that way?
Because what they'll do is they'll take that honey back home and store it as an emergency food source. So even though they might not use it at that moment, they're going to use it as a just-in-case source.
If she moves her hand, would they have stung her?
No. So that's the cool thing is, since she wasn't moving around, she's not swatting around. She just very calmly waited for the bees to show up. They just want to do their job. Their job at that point is to collect the nectar, collect the honey, and take it back home. If she, for example, were to go and press down on the bee, then the bee's going to feel threatened and it might sting her. But just today, for example, I opened up a bucket that had of honey from a removal that I had done, and I never got around to processing it. And I woke up to thousands of bees on my patio, just all over the place. I could easily walk outside, look at them, you hear them, they're crashing into you, but they don't want to do anything else other than work. They weren't interested in attacking. So it's very important that we have these bees producing, or rather performing this pollination service for us for these commodity crops. We grow lots of oranges, strawberries, avocados, mangoes, lychees, you name it. Those are all plants that are pollinated and depend on these pollinators to produce their fruit, which has an economic value for us. And it's our food supply. An incredible thing that you should know is about half of the United States beehives are moved to California now in this season for the almond bloom. The almond bloom requires millions and millions of hives to get pollinated. All right, so down here you can see an almond grove, and you can see that there's just stacks and stacks of hives. Every year they get close to maybe 2.5 million hives just move to California to produce, to pollinate these trees. Beekeepers rent out their hives at $150 each per month that they're out there. So a beekeeper who has 1,000 hives sends his bees to California can expect to make $150,000 at the end of the month. Right? It's a very lucrative business. However, there is a lot of costs associated with it as well, because once those bees are out there, they're exposed to parasites, pesticides. You don't know what those farmers are spraying on their crops, on their fields.
Do they have insurance for their hive?
No. So a lot of the thing is, a lot of beekeepers will just sell off their bees and not expecting to get them back.
Because they might be too.
Right. So it might be their last trip. But interestingly enough, California produces 80% of the world's supply of almonds, and half of all the hives in the United States are moved to California to do that.
Wow.
So there are no native, California native bees?
Yes, there is. However, when you augment the population of bees, let's say you only have 10 bees in this room, and you have 100 flowers, it'll take a long time for those bees to hit each and every flower. But if you have millions of bees trying to do the same job, you get that pollination done a lot sooner and a lot more effective.
So you get every flower.
Exactly, they hit every single flower, and what that does is it increases yields. The more flowers that are visited by bees, the more likely it's going to become a fruit or bear seed.
Which is an almond, so that farmer will get more almonds.
Right. One of the things about bees is that since they are exposed to those parasites and pests, back in 2006, 2007, people were noticing that their beehives that were being overwintered, the majority were being lost. And they had no idea what was going on. They named this the colony collapse disorder. They didn't know the exact reason. What we do know now is that the stress of transporting these bees, the exposure to pesticides, the exposure to these parasites. Top right, you can see a little red dot on the abdomen of the bee. It's actually called the Varroa destructor mite. It has a beautiful name, as you can see. It sounds, it does exactly what it does. It destroys beehive completely. What they do is the bee goes out, she's foraging, she visits a flower, the insect will jump on to the bee, it'll begin feeding off its fluids, and then once it gets back to the hive, it'll hop off, and it'll, what they do is they search out the cells that are producing the male bees. Somehow they can find the bigger cells with the bigger larvae, and they just congregate in these, like these drum cells. So another thing that happens is these little black beetles that you see next to the bee, those are called hive beetles. Those small hive beetles, what they do is they feed on the honey and they lay their larvae in the wax. But the thing with that is a population high enough of these beetles within the colony causes all the honey within the colony to ferment because they have yeast associated with their bodies. So letting these things get out of control and combined with the stress of transport is most likely the reason behind this colony collapses that we're observing. So within the last 5 to 10 years, we've actually seen a reduction in these colony losses because we've become more informed about these parasites, these pests. That's why we're encouraging folks to not spray their bees.
Do these, those parasites, do they only stick onto bees or on other insects?
So these parasites are specialists just to bees. They will not get onto anything else. That's like saying my favorite food is a pizza. I'm not going to eat anything else other than pizza for the rest of my life. That's what these beetles do. They love to feed off bees. So one of these challenges that these bees are facing is everyday backyard gardeners. Once you see an insect or a pest on your garden, the first instinct to do is, I have to kill this. what's the most fastest way to kill an insect is to spray it with something, right? But the problem is those poisons are not, they don't just affect that one pest that you're going for. It's going to affect everyone who's exposed to that chemical. So those pesticides is what really does the damage. Another thing that I'd like to bring up is the lack of awareness. So when people are exposed to bees, the first thing they want to do is swat it, get it away from me, it's going to sting me. No one wants to get stung. But I think the benefit of having these bees working for us and with us, it completely outweighs any negative thing you might have to say about it. Just a few weeks ago, I was called out to do a bee removal. Once I got there, the guy says, "No, I already got rid of them." I said, "How'd you do that?" "I sprayed WD-40 on it." Wow. Right? So what happens now to all those bees? Those bees are going to die. Right? So all those bees are dead. That function that they were producing for that neighborhood, pollinating those trees and those backyards, that's gone now. Right? And if this continues to happen over, from the regional, local scale to the regional, to the state, to the national level, to the globe, it has a very great impact. Yes?
I know you said it takes 12 days to make one teaspoon, but how long does it
It takes them their whole life, so it takes them about 20-something days, 30 days to make that one teaspoon. So this is just a handful of dead bees. That's what happens. You expose these bees to these poisons, and you can expect these bees to die out. So what can you do? I encourage everyone to plant flowers. If you have a small space on a balcony, just get something that flowers. You're going to not only encourage pollinators to visit, you're building a habitat and a food source for these insects that also depend on you to be stewards of the environment, to be able to continue doing their job. Right, so what's wrong with having spiders?
Well, I mean, we don't do anything to them, but all any bees or anything that come, they're just eaten by the spider.
Right, so that's something cool that I wanted to talk about as well, is the balance. There's a relationship between what you plant, what it attracts, and how those interactions between these creatures are going to be. If you plant something, for example, that the spiders love, they're going to take advantage of that habitat and do what they're good at, which is capturing other insects. Right? So perhaps in your garden you might want to space those plants apart a little bit more so there's more diversity. Once you start including diversity into your garden, you're providing different sources of nectar, different flavors of nectar. Let's say that different insects, that's my slice of pizza, that's exactly what I want. So the more you have, the more diverse, the more resilient your garden is to pests, for example, that will be detrimental for your garden. One example that I like to use is the aphids and the ladybugs. If you ever have an aphid problem, you'll notice that not very long afterwards, you're going to start seeing these little black, long insects showing up. That's actually the larva of the ladybug, which are voracious eaters of these aphids. They'll eat, I think it's close to 200 aphids a day, right? So if there's an animal present in your garden, it's going to attract something that's going to eat it. So just be patient. Don't go out and spray it immediately. If you do have an infestation, say of aphids, the best way to do it, to treat it right away would just be squirt it with your hose. That mechanical removal of the aphid is good enough to keep your plant healthy enough to keep growing so that it can fight off these aphids. And at the same time, while these plants are growing, it's creating a habitat for these beneficial insects that are going to come in and be working for you and maintaining your garden. If you do have nuisance bees in your backyard, you don't want them there, you can appreciate what they're doing. Don't spray them. Call professional bee removers to come and get those hives and relocate them. The company that I work with, all of our hives come from bee removals. It's from people who have, they discovered hives in their property. They don't want them there anymore. So what we do is we go, pick them up, bring them back to health if they need some kind of treatment, and then we use those bees to produce our honey, to pollinate for our farmers, and yes?
Right, we're luckily here in Key Biscayne, we have a beekeeper and who will come and remove your bees and save them either in his backyard or he has another place down on Key Largo. It's Ron Herbal,
Yes.
who is a firefighter here in Key Biscayne. And if you have a nice backyard, he'll even give you a beehive to keep.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about. I had a question around here somewhere. Yes.
In exchange for honey. I have to.
So the problem with invasive insects is that they become invasive because somehow they come into the environment and they begin to outcompete the native insects. Right, so these, for example, I'll use the example of a plant and an insect that I studied while I was at the university. The air potato, it's an exotic plant. I don't know if you've encountered it. It's a vine that climbs anything. It grows, 70 feet in a season, and it completely just blankets anything that it's growing on. And it produces these little potatoes that's the way it propagates itself. Anywhere these little potatoes fall, you can expect to see a vine popping out there next season. So what was done recently is these entomologists from the USDA, I believe, went to the native location of where these plants are growing, and they were looking for the insect that did the most damage to these plants. What they did was they found this insect called Lilioceras cheney, which it exclusively eats that plant and nothing else. Right? So what they fight exotics is with other exotics, but only after it's been tested and researched on enough to make sure that it doesn't affect anything else within that environment. I can give you another example of where that biological control has gone really wrong. For example, sugarcane was having these, sugarcane growers had this problem where there was a grub eating the sugarcanes up in the stalks. What they decided to do was to bring that cane toad. Are you all familiar with the cane toad? These really big fat toads that sit outside your door underneath any light. They eat your cat food, the dog food, anything like that. They expected this toad to control these insects that were way up on top of the cane. That's not where the toads were living. The toads can't climb, they're on the ground, so now we have this explosion of an exotic animal that it's not its fault. It's here, but our intentions failed because we didn't study it properly, and we didn't foresee the consequences of having this creature come over. So,
what is the chemical composition of honey, roughly? It's an organic compound?
So what it is, it's sugars produced by the plant.
Sugar, okay.
Right, so the enzymes within the bee's stomach break down these nectars into glucose and sucrose. They break it down into simple sugars. And that's what they deposit into these cells. They reduce the humidity levels, and that's how we ultimately get
Does it collect, are there metal ions that will connect or collect in the, or if there's heavy metals, would they get absorbed into the sugar or adsorbed?
Right, so that's a very important point. I don't know if metals get attached to these
Such
sugars.
as mercury, arsenic, that kind of thing?
I'm not sure, but I do know that exposure to plants that have been sprayed with pesticides have residuals that the bees bring back to the hive. It concentrates them within the honey. So even though they may be exposed to small amounts of toxins out in the field, it may not kill them right away, but once they're doing the job of concentrating it all down and they begin to feed on that when the time comes, they're killing themselves because that contamination is in the honey.
I have a question. Are you familiar with the project on the island where when we had all those white flies, they introduced bees to keep the white flies?
I do not know about that, but that's very
On
interesting.
the key.
Very cool.
It is, we have an infestation already now again, and the village is working with Dr. Manion, I think her name is Dr. Manion,
Okay.
and she is again thinking of what to do, in which areas we have more infestation, is the gumbos, and it is the coconuts, and we we had the extension office come, they already checked it, this is happening, and they're still, they should tell the homeowners already, but they have not yet, but that's happening already.
Excellent. It's better to catch the problem before it becomes too big of a problem, because then when it gets blown out of proportion, then you're going to have to rely on heavy spraying. And again, like I've said, those pesticides, those insecticides are very general. Anyone who gets exposed to it is going to go down.
Was that toad, the bufo toad that they brought over?
Bufo toad, yes.
Oh, okay.
And I was told by the extension office that when you spray, let's say, the coconut, you better know that you should not eat that coconut
Exactly.
for at least a year.
Right.
So, you know.
It's bad for the insects, it's most likely bad for you as well. So to try your best to not spray chemicals. So this is a video of me doing a removal at a community. These beehives, this beehive was persisting in this little water reading hole in the ground. So what we did was we smoked it. Us beekeepers, we use this tool, this smoker. What it does is it masks the alarm pheromones of these bees. Bees communicate via chemical signals. They have, if they sense a threat, they're going to release that threat pheromone, and what that does is it immediately galvanizes the entire hive to attack that source of that threat. So what I'm trying to do in this video is gather up the bees. As you can see, I was free-handling them. I didn't have any protection on my hands. That's because they sensed that with this smoke that I drew them out of their colony, that they felt that they didn't have a home anymore. So once they have that response, the bees will, what they'll do is they'll try to ball up, the queen will follow them, and what happens is there's going to be scout bees that will now go out and try to find the most suitable habitat for them to all fly together. So before they get the chance to do that, we set up this little box. You see the box right back here is a hive, and we had already captured the queen and caged her in this little clip. And we put them inside the frame. Let me show you real quick. Inside these boxes, you have these frames. You can pass this around. Feel free to poke the honey, the wax if you want. So what we do is, I'll get to your question in just a second. What we do is we put the queen inside, and by me grabbing those bees and dumping them at the entrance of the hive, they're going to release what's called the Nasanov pheromone, which smells a lot like lemongrass. So once they begin to smell that, it's going to attract all the bees and it's going to tell them, welcome home, this is our new home, so come on over. So the more bees I dumped at the front of that hive, the sooner that response that the bees were going to come start marching in was a lot better. So what we did is we leave the box there, and at night we come in, cover up the entrance, and move them off to our apiary. Bee removals happen at nighttime when all the bees are home sleeping. Yes. Question?
How come when we get stung that the stinger comes out, but when it stings an insect, the stinger doesn't?
Okay, have you ever seen a fishing hook, how it has like a little extra piece that kind of sticks out? Once that stinger goes in, imagine that little barb is actually going to prevent you from pulling the stinger back out. So the more you try to pull it back out, it really grips on it and stays in there. So unfortunately, our skin is very tough for a bee sting. So once it's in there, it can't come back out. But if they were stinging other insects, their bodies are a lot different. So they're able to repeatedly sting other bees if they had to. That's why that happens. So, again, thank you for having me here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And we do have spoons available if you want to taste different kinds of honey. Yes?
I understand that a lot of times honey is not all the same, quality.
Yes.
And that there's a way to test. I mean, you can't go to the supermarket and open the honey but like if you bought honey, there is a way to test to see that it's real.
So that's something that you'll see. The source of your honey is very important. That's why I say buy local from your local beekeepers. A lot of the honey that you'll see in the supermarkets are actually mixed with high fructose corn syrup. They're mixed with different kinds of honey from different locations. Canadian honey, Brazilian honey. Not that there's anything wrong, but you're bringing in, yes, and they actually infuse them with different flavors as well. So if you ever tasted orange blossom honey, you'll see that it tastes a lot like citrus, and that's just a property of that honey. But however, I've tasted some honeys where it tastes awfully like strawberry candy, which is artificial. So some folks will adulterate that honey with artificial oils to give it that flavor. That it's kind of like a marketing scheme. The more flavors available, the more people I can sell to. Yes, ma'am.
I've heard that honey is the only food, for lack of a better term, that does not deteriorate, and that they even found honey in the Egyptian
in the tombs of pharaohs and things like that.
is still edible.
Right, so the reason that is because honey is very acidic, and since it has a very low moisture content, it's not conducive for bacterial or fungal growth. That's why you can find honey that's been sitting in these tombs for thousands of years, and it's still edible. Yes.
So have we reached the point where the bee population is critical and we don't have enough bees to pollinate?
No, that was happening a few years back. Luckily, with better bee management practices and with we're learning more every day about these bees. We're learning more about what's causing these stressful events, these stressors on these bees, and by better managing that, we have a lot more healthier hives today than we did 2006, 2007. Yes.
When you were grabbing them, would they sting you?
If I was being rough with them, the chances of me being stung were very high.
But
Yes.
still, when you touch the bees, don't they try to sting you?
Not when they're in that mode. So bees have two modes. You can say when they have a hive and they have a queen and they have honey to defend, you cannot do what I just did in that video because they will sting. Since we were removing that hive and we took out all the honeycomb, they sensed that they didn't have a home anymore. Those bees instantly switch on to that swarming mode, which means that they just want to get together. They're going to send out bees to look for a new home, and they're just going to be sitting patiently until they get the signal, we found a new place, let's go home. And then once we set up there, we can again start defending.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I do some gardening in Colorado and I have a lot of bees. Where do they go in the winter and how do they make it through the winter?
Right, so overwintering bees up in the northern states, it's a lot different than what we go through down here. We have the warm climate, we're able to support a productive colony year long. The bees up north, what they do is they have to pretty much wrap the hive up, they seal them up, not to the point where it's airtight because they're going to be producing moisture and that there needs to be some kind of ventilation, but the bees work all year long to store up honey so they can make it through the winter just by feeding on that honey that they've stored up. So they really don't have to go out of the hive.
They don't freeze?
They do freeze. A lot of bees do freeze. So that's why beekeepers insulate their hives in the north.
Yeah, but if they're natural.
If they're natural, there's...
Do they die then?
Yes, so the environment is a filter of these bees. So if the environment's too cold, it's not productive for the bee, they're not going to want to live there. But by us artificially managing these bees in hives and in apiaries, we're able to sustain these populations. That's why we have constantly bees up north.
So in that sort of situation, a wild hive in a cold climate, is it just what matters is that the queen survives the winter? Or
if the queen survives the winter, there's a chance that they can bounce back and regrow. But if enough workers die, she doesn't have enough support bees, nurse bees, to maintain the new larvae. She can't feed her babies. Her sole job is to lay eggs. And she's very important, but she's not the most important. If the bee dies, for example, if the queen bee dies, the rest of the colony knows how to detect that they are queenless and will actually initiate a new larva to become the next queen. So they'll make queen cells, is what they call them.
Do they feed the queen something different?
Yes, they do. So the development of the bee larva, normally in the first 3 days, they're fed something called royal jelly. This royal jelly is it's like a milky substance. After those 3 days, normally the worker bees are no longer fed that. But the queen bee is fed that the entire time until she pupates. And that's what, it's essentially like it's a superfood that allows the bee to continue to develop these reproductive properties, because a worker bee cannot lay fertile eggs. They don't have the, I guess you can say, the parts within them. They haven't developed because they weren't given the jelly long enough for that to develop.
What is tupelo honey?
Tupelo honey is a honey that's harvested from the tupelo tree, and the importance about that is that I think it's a right-hand sugar, so people that are diabetic are able to consume that without having to worry too much about insulin.
It has a reputation as being the best.
Yes.
Is it?
They say it's very tasty. I've never tried it.
What's it called?
Tupelo. T-U-P-E-L-O. Tupelo.
What about the New Zealand?
The Manuka honey. Yes, that's a very expensive honey. I guess it comes from the Manuka tree, and there's, let's say, it has a lot more beneficial properties than your regular honey. So there's a market for it. Yes, ma'am.
Yesterday I got something, one of these messages that go around that everybody seems to be getting them. It's like how to tell the difference between honey that's pure and honey that's been adulterated. So they pour cold water or just water on two different honeys. One is pure, one is, and the one that's adulterated, it kind of seems to dissolve. Maybe dissolve the honey? Yeah, maybe it's been adulterated with sugar water.
Yes, that happens, but that's not a sure way of doing that, because, for example, I know this honey came from my hives, and this does exactly what you're saying. If you were to pour this into milk, for example, when I drink milk and honey, and you stir this up, it'll dissolve just like anything. But if I were to pour this honey, which is a lot more viscous, into that milk, it will not dissolve unless it's warm enough, right? So that's all dependent on the nectar source and the kind of sugars that are in that nectar that the bees are collecting.
And as part of that, what I got, it showed the other sample. They pour water on it and swirl it around, and then you had a little pattern that looked like a honeycomb pattern. And that's supposed to be some kind of memory thing. The honey has memory. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
I have never, but I'll look into that and see what's going on there.
It doesn't ring true to me.
It doesn't ring true to me either, but.
Would you say that it depends on the viscosity, whether it's going to dissolve with water?
It doesn't, you can't really tell until you try it. But in order to prevent yourself from getting adulterated honey, I recommend speaking to your local beekeepers and just buying local. That way you know that the honey that you're getting is healthy, pesticide-free, and you're supporting the local business, and you're supporting your local beekeeper, and you're also supporting the ecological functions that these bees are doing for you in your backyard.
Can they make honey if they have the pesticide?
Yes, so they can. But the problem, yes.
Is that honey still edible?
It is, but it can also be toxic to the bees that are going to eat it, and it's also can be toxic for you who's going to eat it. So that's why it's important to make sure that you know where you're placing your honeybees, and making sure that the farms that you work with, if you're going to do pollination services, are not spraying the plants with something toxic. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I have so many questions.
No.
Do you use honey as a wound treatment?
I have not done that yet, but I've heard of it. So I've heard that once you get stung, the best thing to do is put a little bit of honey on it. I wouldn't do that because that's going to attract more bees.
Tell us what you do with a hive. Let's say that this is my yard.
Yes.
And I have dogs. And let's say that I have children. Where would you put those boxes or?
So placement of the hives is very important because you don't want angry neighbors. You don't want to be disturbing the bees when you walk by or doing mowing your grass and things like that. It might take off the bees. So the best way to do it is to make sure that the entrance or the exit way of that hive is clear. If you were to stand in front of this hive right here and block the entrance, you're going to get a traffic buildup of bees right in front of you, and you're going to get them building up behind you because they're trying to get out of the way, or rather to do their job. They're very automatic and systematic. If they like to go out and up, they're going to continue to do that. But a lot of the times they do like a straight, path to it. If you stand in front of those hives, you're going to get hit a few times, you're going to get bumped, and you might upset a bee enough that it's going to say, "Here's a little sting, out of the way." So placing them near penned-up animals, locked-up animals is not necessarily a good idea because you never know when those bees might be a little bit agitated. Maybe it's too warm, it's been raining, they're just not having a good day. They'll sting anything they deem as a threat. Yes. Do bees sleep? They rest. I can't say they close their eyes and sleep. I don't know. But I do know that the queen does not ever stop laying her eggs. So it's just a constant grind. They're always working.
But
Yes, ma'am?
But they stay in the hive?
Right, so they'll stay in the hive at nighttime because they don't have the visual clues from the sun to tell them, okay, there's a patch of flowers when the sun is up this way. They have their little bee dance that they do to kind of like tell the other bees, navigate towards this way. Without light, without the sun out, they don't come out. So if it's a cloudy day, you'll notice that the bees are a lot more concentrated within the hive. They're not going to be out and about foraging. Yes?
Do bees know which flowers don't have nectar?
So if a flower is open, the chances of it having nectar is very high. Right? So if a bee decides to go out one day and sample these little Spanish needles, these little white flowers that we see all over our lawns, they're very meticulous. So they'll hit each and every flower, even though it has nectar or not, because they want it. So before they move on to the next food source, they're going to try to deplete whatever's flowering at the moment. That's why you have orange blossom honey, you have strawberry honey, things like that, because they really like sticking to that one food source. I had a question around here. Yes?
How far do the bee travel to get to?
So from the hive, the bees can travel up to 5 miles out.
Wow.
Bigger than Key Biscayne.
I have a question because the pictures you have were what for me would be called a honeybee. And I come from the north and there's a big fat bee that we call a bumblebee.
Right.
Are they related? Do they have
So,
a similar lifestyle?
They have a similar lifestyle. Those bees can repeatedly sting you because they don't have a little barb on the end of the stinger. So if you upset a bumblebee hive, you're going to get it a lot more.
Do they make hives also?
They also make hives, but it's not in the same structure as these bees do. These bees like to draw their combs out in like these little panels. The bumblebee does it more like laid out horizontally.
And do they make honey?
Yes, but it's not collected because it doesn't produce enough honeys that it's economically.
Oh, it's really only, they don't have extra,
Right.
it's just mostly.
It's not to say that their job as a pollinator isn't as important as the honeybee, but it doesn't have that same benefit to us
It's
financially.
not economic.
Right.
When you go to the health food store and buy bee pollen, what's that?
So bee pollen is essentially when the bees go out and they search for pollen, what they do is they'll visit the flower, they'll have a little bit of nectar, they'll mix the pollen of the flower that they're sitting on with a little bit of saliva, and they'll pack it into their legs, into what's called bee pens. So, yeah, so pollen pens. So in order to collect the pollen from these bees, at the entrance, we put this little, you can say it's like a little barrier, just wide enough for the bee to fit through. So once it starts coming in, those pants are way too big, so they kind of like push the pollen off the legs of the bee, and you just collect it in a little trap. So that's how we collect pollen. That's what that is. Pollen in those bottles is just the pollen removed from the bees that are going out before.
But then they don't have it to make honey with when they get in.
Right, so when you're collecting pollen and you're managing your hives, it's not recommended to, to withhold that pollen for more than 3 days, because that pollen is absolutely critical for the development of the larvae and to feed the workers within the hive. Any other questions?
Bees get mad. I mean, how often? I don't understand it. You have that tray, that is in the box, and you check how many in a box.
So this, okay, we'll talk about that a little bit. This little box actually holds 2 frames. This box is not so much for producing honey, but it's more for the queen bee. Once she's newly emerged, we put these little boxes out there that are called nucleus boxes. The nucleus box is essentially the minimal amount of bees necessary to support a freshly emerged queen while she goes out on her mating flight with the drone, returns and begins to lay her eggs. So I wouldn't hold bees in here for longer than a month. So after that 1 month, I ship them off into another box that holds up to 5 of these little frames. Right? In a few more months, they're shifted into these 10 frame boxes, which is the standard for commercial beekeepers and for backyard beekeepers. Each one of these frames, when it comes down to it, can hold about 2 to 3 pounds of honey. Right?
2 to 3 pounds?
2 to 3 pounds each one.
So you get 30 pounds per box?
Yes. So what happens is during the springtime when there's a nectar flow, the first box at the very bottom is reserved for brood production, which is making more bees. Then what they do is we put imagine like a little fence just above the first layer here that prevents the queen from going up. And by doing that, you're preventing her from laying eggs in those cells. So anything above that little fencing is just pure honey. And that's what we harvest. So once we see that these boxes are filling up with honey, we'll stack another one right on top of it. And they'll just keep producing and keep producing. I've seen folks that stack on 8 boxes of hives. So each box weighs 40 to 50 pounds. You can imagine that's lots and lots of honey per hive. So that's.
How often do you harvest the honey?
Down here in Florida, we harvest about 3 to 4 times a year.
Oh, that's it. 3
Yeah.
to 4 times a year.
But you can be constantly pulling honey from those hives. Question?
Do we have bumblebees in South Florida?
In South Florida, I haven't seen them. The only time I've seen bumblebees was when I was in Central Florida in Orlando. I don't know if they're any further south, but I have seen other bees that are not bumblebees. I've seen carpenter bees that are, they like to burrow into wood. I've seen these really attractive big bees out in the Everglades that if I had a shirt on with a blue button, that bee would always come to that blue button. It was very attracted to the buttons on my shirt. So anytime I would go out into the field and just having my lunch, these bees would come up. And I would actually play with these bees, which is something very cool, and I don't think a lot of people know that you can do with these bees is I would get a little stick and just toss it into the air, and these bees would follow that little stick and then immediately come back to the little button and just hang out around. Strange things.
Why is it so attractive to the button?
It must have been the color. It must have looked like a food source for it. So it's curious, it wants to investigate, so that's why it just constantly hung out around it.
So harvesting the honey depends on each beekeeper. How, depending on how full
The boxes.
the boxes are.
Yes.
In California, they don't collect the honey then when they keep the.
Some will, others won't. It all depends on the agreement that you have with the farmer, whether they're utilizing pesticides or not. At the end, it just comes down to the agreement that the beekeeper has with the farmer. If I were sending my bees to California, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if the farm in fact is, refraining from using these pesticides or not. So it's just something that you have to consider before you send your bees out, and before you continue to process the honey.
How long does it take the bees to make a box of honey?
It takes about 3 months. 3 months for I mean, they're making honey immediately, but in order for you to harvest honey, I would give the hive about a year to really establish itself before you can harvest it consistently. Yes, sir?
What's so special about Tupelo honey?
The Tupelo honey, it's very tasty, and the structure of the sugar molecules is different, so that diabetics can, enjoy the honey without glucose. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
If the bee can travel as far as 5 miles, how can the beekeeper be sure that there's no pesticide?
That's why I encourage everyone, don't spray. Encourage your local farmers to, just use organic methods. If you are going to be spraying pesticides, make sure you're not spraying them when the plants are in bloom, and to not spray when the bees are out foraging. Bees come out 8 o'clock in the morning and they come back to the hive as soon as the sun is setting. If you had to spray, spray when the bees are not there.
Usually in the summer, the mosquitoes are so bad, so they send out the pesticides to spray all over Key Biscayne. Does that kill the bees?
It does kill the bees.
Wow.
It kills bees, butterflies, pollinators, mosquitoes, anything you name it.
Right.
And when they spray for whiteflies, it kills them too.
So it's important to know when these sprayings are going to be happening, because you could lock your bees up inside the hive until the spraying is done. They have enough. If they have enough honey stored up, they can live in there 3 to 4 days being trapped before you can release them again after the threat of the spray is gone.
Now, I've noticed last summer, I guess it was, that they sprayed at night. So the bees, I guess, are in there. So, and then everything else is like, hibernating or whatever it does at night.
Yes.
And so they feel like that's the better thing to do. So that they are learning.
Yes. Absolutely. Any other questions? All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.